All right. Welcome, everybody. This is our autumn horror reading. We're going to do a kind of little celebration of indie horror. And my name is Josh Hanson. And I think we're just going to go around the circle here and let everybody introduce themselves. Take it away, Zach.
All right. Hi, everyone. I am Zach Rosenberg. I am a horror writer living in Florida. And I am the author of Hunger's as Old as This Land, The Long Shalom. And I will be reading from my forthcoming Jewish pirate horror novel, The Devils in the Deep Blue Sea.
Nice. All right. Seth?
So I am C.S. Umble. I'm a speculative fiction author, primarily a novelist. I'm the author of that light Sublime trilogy, which culminates with the third book's release here on November the 28th. So if you haven't pre-ordered it, go do that now. It's from Cemetery Dance. Appreciate all the support for that. I'm also the author of the Blackwell series, which came out originally through Dark Heart, but has been subsequently purchased by Cemetery Dance and will be coming out in 2024 with the first three books coming out then. And then we'll do 2025 for the fourth book, and then probably 2039 for the fifth book. Seeing how everything shakes out.
Excellent. Rae?
Yeah, I'm Rae Knowles. I'm the author of the Stradivarius, which came out earlier this year, and Merciless Waters, which is a sapphic horror novella that's coming out in just a few days here. And super excited to be with you. Thank you so much. I second Seth's recommendation to pre-order that series. I got to read them all, and just incredible.
I appreciate that. Everyone should also pick up Merciless Waters because
Kind of great.
I'm in the acknowledgments. So
Wow.
Sure.
I'm excited about that.
It's a pretty fantastic book. I will agree on the total.
Great work.
It really is.
And Josh, now coming to you live, ready for yours. Here we go.
All right. And I'm Josh Hanson. I'm the author of King's Hill and The Woodcutters, which just came out this week. And I was just thinking about it, which is more of a weird Western. And I was just thinking about as we were going around the loop there about how like all of us have kind of put out kind of hybrid genre books. It's definitely a theme going around amongst the group here, which I think is pretty exciting. Pirate horror,
Yes.
Jewish pirate horror. Yeah, I'm here for it. All right. And I live in Wyoming. We're kind of spread all over the place. I'm kind of really isolated up here in the middle of everything, away from everyone. So I think the game plan is to do some short readings and then have a conversation. Is there anybody who's antsy and would like to start?
It looks like Zach is ready to go.
Yeah.
Ready to fire.
I think we all read that.
That was actually me offering the floor, but if I'm being heard, then I will go first.
Absolutely
do it.
Start us off with a big bang.
All right. Okay. This is from, like I said, my forthcoming dark fantasy Jewish pirate horror called The Devils and the Deep Blue Sea. And this is going to be how the book kicks off. So Captain Sebastian Hawkins had been a nightmare when he was alive. Dead, he was an atrocity. As Luke Barnett hid and tried to ignore the whisper of the devil in the oceans, Hawkins' men were finishing their bloody work upon the decks. The dancer was a dead and hollow thing, a floating abattoir that reeked of salt, mingling with the acrid burn of smoke and the pungent aroma of blood. The last embers of the day sent scattered bouquets of fire over the waters below, and all around the ship, dead men roamed the decks. They walked as though unaccustomed to their limbs, but with the solemn gait of those who knew they were invincible, their boots clapping against the red-streaked wood. A sandy-haired man with a scraggly beard dipped his fingers in a bullet wound across his shoulder, giggling as he ran his fingers across the hole. His eyes closed and he shivered in an ecstasy most would have reserved for a lover's caress. How does it feel? A tan man with dark hair and a faded coat-ass, voice laden with what might have been envy. Does it hurt? Beautifully, the wounded man responded. He limped his way to a uniformed sailor propped against the mast, and the man raised a feeble hand, let loose the beginning of a plea before the pirate's sword sheared into his chest. Another pirate stretched out his arms, crowing in triumph, his face dotted with wooden splinters from cannon shrapnel. Red lines streaked across his face, running down like tears, even as he cackled like a madman. This pain, he said, limping with a twisted leg that should have been unable to support his weight. I've forgotten how it feels. It's so wonderful. Another knelt by a smoking piece of twisted metal, clasping it with his hands and grinning as his flesh sizzled and bubbled, gripping it even tighter as the skin smoked and Luke could hear the blisters pop. I forgot what being so warm is like. The boats had already been cut free from the dancer, and the crew had hoped to lighten the load so the schooner might better its chances of escape. But it had all been for naught before the speed of the Delight. A vast, mighty brig, bristling with cannons that gleamed like iron teeth. The sails were red, their design a grinning skeleton with a black shade behind them, holding white shoulders in a tenebrous embrace. The shade's red eyes sewed into the design were twin portals to the abyss. And the devil whispered in Luke's ear, a tender murmur that he had to run or there would be no further chances. He clutched tight to the menorah in his palms, so he bled from the medallion's sharp edge, unable to tear his eyes away from the horde of walking dead men as they killed and reveled amongst their victims. And then a horn sounded, a clarion call amidst the smoke. As the dead men drew aside on mangled, twisted limbs, they snapped to attention and saluted with their blades. Heavy footsteps on the gangplank heralded the arrival of their captain. Of average height, his black hair was tied behind him, face burnt tan from the heavy beat of the sun. A blue coat fluttered about him in breeze, his smile white and sharp in the fading daylight. He wore a different face from when Luke had seen him last, though his eyes were unmistakable, the cold and black of a shark, devoid of pity, conscience, or regret. Windows to a house that had stood vacant for so many years. Luke, his voice was tender, like an old friend beckoning him to dinner. I know you're there, Luke. It's me. It's your captain. And Luke knew, in all the terrors of the night, deep within his heart, that what was before him had to be true. Captain Sebastian Hawkins had come.
And there you have it.
Beautiful.
One of my favorite things from that is the whole time I could tell you're like, this is some serious fucking pirate stuff we're doing right now. Everything from the spray of the water to obviously I love it. The description of the cannonade is very fun. I like how you talked about it being the teeth. That's a lot of fun. But the whole time you're just like, this is some serious pirate shit right here. The whole time. The intent is there.
I was trying to go for like Jewish Evil Dead meets Robert E. Howard meets Black Sails.
Well, there's Robert E. Howard in there for sure. Yeah, without question.
I like the pan up to the sails, the description of the sails.
Oh, thank you, Ray.
Right.
Yeah, no, it's just an incredibly cinematic opening. Yeah, that's beautiful.
You could almost hear Hans Zimmer's score from the Pirates of the Caribbean, right? The whole time. Very cinematic.
Oh, thank you so much, guys. That really means a lot to me, coming from like all the incredible writers in here.
All right. Who's up next?
Ray should go next.
All right. We're gonna keep with the nautical theme, I guess.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, 100%.
All right. Yinka's Tale, as translated by Ambrose the Sea Crate, with an added bit of flair for his amusement. My brother was a mirror. We shared red curls, a penchant for adventure and tricks, and our parents, of course. In our high and lonely village, they called us the twins, not only because of the circumstance of our birth, but because we could scarcely be found separate from one another. It seemed at times I could hear his thoughts and he mine, though this was likely the result of spending so little time apart. One afternoon, midwinter, we set off with our sled, determined to take the highest hill past the stream. Bolshoi Kunalai in January is as icy as anywhere, and as we traversed the frozen lake, our steps were heavy and sure. The prior year, the water had frozen so thick carriages could cross with little concern for cracking it. We had no reason to believe this winter would be any different. But when the lake began to moan beneath our boots, we knew we had been wrong. We exchanged a look. That's all we needed. No words crossed our lips. We ran. Steps in time and strides equal in length, we crossed the frozen lake as the ice cracked beneath our feet, the crevasse spiraling out like lightning from the weak spot in the center. It was surprisingly loud, I recall, and the cracking sound echoed off the mountain faces, bounced back at us from every direction. I felt my pulse race as the shoreline came into view. We were almost there. We'd almost made it when the ground beneath opened and swallowed Dimitri whole. Fractured ice beneath my feet, I froze. The water was black, no sign of life, as if he'd descended into the bowels of some other realm. But then I saw air bubbles, large at first, then a slow and steady stream. I screamed for him, and my breath hung in the air as mist. Without thought, I plunged my gloved hands into the water below. Cold burrowed into my skin like 1,000 bees, but still I clutched and waved beneath the water's surface. Finally, I found Purchase, the fabric of his coat, and pulled with all my force. But my feet slid on the slick ice sheet, and I found no leverage to pull. Soaked to my elbows, I screamed his name until my throat was hoarse. When finally he surfaced, his lips were blue. His eyes, white and vacant, sat open without purpose. I shook him, called his name again and again. I raged at him, begged him, tugged and pulled, but could not bring him onto the ice. The warmth of his flesh was fading with my strength, and finally I stopped pulling, arm dislocated at the socket, my hands numb. I sat at the hole in the ice, fingers clenched around his jacket while he floated there. The current turned him face down, and I waited for Papa. Surely he would fix this. Surely he would know how. The sun sank beneath distant mountaintops. The wind picked up. My shivering stopped just as the last of the orange glow waned into faint blue. The first of the stars peeked from behind a midnight blanket of sky. I was warm again. It was then I had strange thoughts. Dimitri had gone for a swim. Just a swim, I thought. Odd clothes for a swim, but then Dimitri has always been odd. And he must be lonely now. Yes, it's only right I join him. I began to sweat. How unusual to sweat, surrounded by ice. I knew it then, and yet I was compelled to remove my coat, my jacket, my gloves, and boots. My socks, soaked through, were last to go. In my undergarments, I faintly remembered I'd been waiting for Papa, but the water seemed to call to me, and Dimitri must be so alone, must want my company, I thought. We were scarcely apart, as I'd told you. It was clear to me what I should do. I dangled my legs in the opening of the ice. Frigid water was a welcome relief for my burning body. I clasped the edge as I might a summer pool, still clutching Dimitri by the coat, then launched myself down, happy to be near him again. The current carried us beneath the ice shelf. How wonderful, I thought. Not unlike the sled ride we'd planned. Wrapping my arms and legs around his stiffening body, I nestled my head in the crook of his neck. It felt natural to return to him this way, like a homecoming to our time in the womb. Good night, Dimitri. The words flowed out, accompanied by a parade of air bubbles, my final gift to him. I slept beneath the frozen lake, beside my brother, my twin. Never could we be parted, or so I believed. But I see now that we've been severed, permanently severed. Vague sadness always dwelled within my heart, but now it has a name, and the name is Dimitri. It's too much to bear. I wish to join him wherever he is, so let me be free. If you've a shred of kindness within you, free me so I might find my brother and rest with him a while longer. I have no other wish but this.
Oh,
Yeah, and that is the difference between the hammer and the scalpel. And both are very valuable tools and how deftly crafted. That's tremendous. Great job.
That was gorgeous. Simply exquisite. The prose is fantastic. The metaphors and everything else are amazing. The cold like the bees beneath the skin is just an incredible turn of phrase. That whole thing was gorgeous, right?
Thank you, Zach.
Yeah, for real. I love these throughout the whole book, these little flashes of memories that keep that are just kind of gut punches. We were promised smut, and instead
I know.
we get this.
I know. So I should have prefaced, I wanted to do smut, and then I looked at the smut in the book, and all of it has spoilers, and I didn't want to spoiler it. You know, it's not even out yet. So next time, I'll catch you on the next time and read some smut.
Well, you did just strike a blow in the argument about whether, sex is necessary for plot development. If all of the sex is necessary for the plot, I guess you just said so. Yeah.
I just question whether plot is necessary for sex development.
Clearly, it got in the way tonight, right? So yeah,
A fair debate.
Yeah.
Great.
Also, I would just like to point out that story is told by a sea snake, which I love.
He's the best character in the book. I mean,
Absolutely.
I don't think there's any question about
Yes.
that.
Absolutely.
Always worth celebrating a deft hand. That's great.
All right.
Josh, you want to rock, paper, scissors for it?
I'll
Thumb
go.
wrestle? Oh, you're going to take. Great.
I'll fight. I'm not going to fight you.
So
All right. So I'm going to read a little bit from the Woodcutters.
This is the one I read.
Excellent. Yeah. So it does require a tiny bit of setup, not a lot, because I'm going to read right from the middle. But our character, Lewis, has found himself out in the woods in the middle of the Wyoming Territory, out trying to track down some missing men. And things have gone bad, and because it's a bad place. And so I'm just going to read this very short chapter where we see him. Things are going to finally get real bad. So, all right, this chapter is called Abattoir. They walked along the ravine's bottom for maybe a mile. Nothing looked familiar to Lewis, but that meant little. He wasn't accustomed to paying attention to these things. He wondered briefly about the third group, but quickly put it out of his mind. It wasn't his responsibility. He reveled briefly in the freedom of irresponsibility. Fassbender stopped, one hand raised. He tilted his head, listening. Lewis heard nothing. What? He whispered. Quiet, Fassbender hissed, and then took a few steps to the right, arm still raised. And then Lewis heard it, the sound of something large moving through the underbrush. He imagined the snuffling breath, the scrabbling claws, the thing growing as it moved, swelling like a blister, filled with a syrup of blood and pus. Run, Fassbender said, and then he was off. Lewis did his best to keep up, but the bottom of the ravine was either slick rock or wet sand, the stream just beneath the surface. His foot sunk into that sand once up to the ankle, and he had to stop and pull himself loose, all the while imagining the thing leaping from the ledge above and landing on top of him. Fassbender was getting farther and farther ahead, not looking back. Lewis was forgotten. He moved on again, his boot heavy with water, the cold startling him awake. He heard nothing, but he felt the presence of something down in the ravine with them, something close behind. He ran, ignoring his back's complaint, ignoring the squelching of the wet boot, ignoring the panic going off like signal flares behind his eyes. He blocked out everything but the sight of Fassbender racing forward and closing the gap between them. Fassbender was his anchor, the tether to the real world. Then Fassbender was climbing, scrabbling over fallen rock that should not be there. They'd come this way, through the ravine, and there was no such barrier. There was no way they could be so turned around. Lewis tried not to think, focusing only on scrambling up after the captain. At the top of the barrier, just as Fassbender was sliding down on his butt, boots knocking rock down before him, Lewis glanced back over his shoulder, down at the shadowed path that they had just run. Nothing was there. No beast followed. He turned so that he was facing the slope of rock and slid down, scraping the palms of one hand and the knuckles of the hand holding the knife, not caring. At the bottom he stood and turned, ready to run on. and crashed into Fassbender, standing stock still, arms at his sides. Lewis took in a quick breath and froze beside him. Some of them were hanging from gnarled branches that loomed out over the ravine. Some were spread eagle on large stones. Some had been set in sitting positions, their backs to the canyon wall, hands in their laps. Lewis couldn't slow his mind enough to get a clear count, but he thought there were 7 or 8. They all wore blue wool uniforms, though their hats were gone. They all had been eviscerated, their insides drawn out, and arranged on the ground in complicated curves and rays. The man sitting closest to where the 2 frozen men stood had not just been scalped, but the skin had been peeled from the back of his neck up and over, removing his entire face. Lewis knew this because despite the face looking down, the skin of his head lay against his chest like a gory bib. Once again their eyes were missing, and the bodies that hung, their feet just above the ground, seemed to stare at Lewis, the dark wells of their empty sockets seeming to accuse. Lewis didn't know how long they stood there, among the reek and flies, just looking, studying, taking in the way their limbs had been split lengthwise, exposing the bone. But eventually, Fassbender spoke. "That's Ellis," he said, his voice so quiet Lewis wasn't sure he'd heard. "What?" "Ellis. He was on yesterday's patrol with you, and the others, woodcutting. And I think that's O'Leary." He waved a hand toward one of the hanging men. "But they weren't here," Lewis started, not really sure where the thought was going. Where was here? What part of the looping, ever-shifting landscape had they now stumbled upon? How might they ever find their way home? And what was home anyway? A long rectangular yard of wooden walls? Could those walls be expected to hold back whatever had done this? Whatever could twist space around them? Whatever could empty out all these men's insides onto the rock and dirt? Lewis didn't think so. So he stood beside the captain, frozen with fear, and tried to read whatever message was written in the glistening, fly-blackened intestines stretched across the ground. He understood nothing.
Sledgehammer, scalpel, cleaver. Just hack, 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 tremendous. What a great way of setting all of that, setting the entire scene, which is, of course, reminiscent of the way Cormac McCarthy uses it in Blood Meridian. Just a really tremendous way of setting up this absolute murder scene. Yep. Great descriptive work, Josh. That's great.
100%. It is violent. It is brutal. It is awesome. And Josh, I have the Woodcutter. I've started it. I just picked it up. I am really loving it so far. Hearing that was fantastic.
Thank you so much.
I really agree with Cassandra in the chat. The gory bib. The bib. We love to see it.
Yeah. Everybody needs one.
Everybody needs a good old-fashioned gory bib.
Face bib. Why not?
I don't think I'll ever get tired of the word abattoir and watching authors live up to it.
Sure. Yeah. Just absolutely slaughtering characters on screen or leaving the refuse of them behind for the reader to find. It's great.
All right.
Well, that leaves me.
Yeah.
And I appreciate everybody else's reading. Y'all all done a tremendous job. I'm going to be reading from the second chapter of The Light of a Black Star, which is the third book in that Light Sublime. Again, comes out on November the 28th. Now, there are spoilers in here, so I'm just warning you now. Abandon all hope, ye who enter this, enter here.
If your readers have made it this far, they already abandoned hope.
Well, if my sales say anything about that, Josh, it's that not a lot of them have. But that's okay, because it's all about the work. And so I will be appreciative to be able to share this with you. This is chapter 2 from The Light of a Black Star. Chapter 2, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Under a gray blanket of clouds, Carson Ptolemy stood on the sun deck of the Duke of Natchez. He was alone. Pipe clenched in false teeth, he leaned against a brass rail, watching thin plates of ice float past the churning steamer like frozen lily pads. They drifted down the cold Mississippi River toward Baton Rouge. Annie Miller and the others were waiting for him there. The business of the Peregrine estate, or at least what was left of it, was in New Orleans, but word had reached Carson about the strange reports from the lower Mississippi region. people going missing for weeks, their blood-drained corpses found in dark alleyways or on the riverbank, bloated, frozen stiff. It was so blatantly vampiric activity that it gave him pause, wondering if it was too risky to ask his friends to meet him. When it came to Sigurd's want for revenge and the guile of the Red Kingdom, the possibility of a trap was a very real thing. He had considered the dangers. Then he'd telegraphed his friends, informing them of his suspicions. It had been 6 months since the Battle of Chicago, 6 months since Sarah Lockhart, Sven Eriksson, and Annie Miller had come to Carson's rescue. After making their way back to derelict Abilene on the steam train Hephaestus, which had been so easy to take considering its former owner had been shot and killed by Annie, he'd spent the next month convalescing. While his body healed from what the Society of Prometheus had done to him, or at least as much as he could heal, he spent the time learning what had happened to the Peregrine estate and the judge. Annie spared no detail of Sigurd's attack and the many lives it stole. Judge Hezekiah Ellison, Professor Robert Bass, her friend Orrin, and even her own mother. All of them dead at the hands of the vampire knight of the Red Kingdom, Sigurd of Antioch. Annie told him all that she had done, all that she had given up to come to his rescue in Chicago, and Carson had listened to the whole story without interruption. He hadn't known what to say, but she didn't wait for him to say anything. Sarah says you know better than her or Sven how to hunt the vampires, she said, staring at her hands as she stuffed tobacco into the bowl of her pipe. How to fight them? Carson envied the dexterity of her fingers, the indifferent ease. His own hands were skinny and weak, blue and black, every knuckle stiff. Yes, he said. Gilbert taught me. Annie's eyes snapped up, flashing in the parlor lamplight with the deep blue of the Texas horizon. There was something about the sharpness of her gaze that made Carson look away, sending his eyes combing through every ribbon of her auburn hair. She took a deep breath. Your father taught you. Now you're going to teach me. Carson saw in her the same rage and need for revenge that had driven him to chase the members of the Society of Prometheus. That desire had sent him down a bloody path leading to his capture and torture at their cruel hands. He would not allow that to happen to Annie. She had saved his life, and more than that, saved him from the high priest, the black manuscript, and the pantheon of malevolent creatures they served. He owed her everything. Annie Miller could have asked him for a handful of starlight, and he would have found a way to reach up and take it for her. There was nothing she could not ask for, nothing she could not take. Carson gathered his bravery and dared to look deeply into her eyes. Behind her cold mask of fury, he saw a glimpse of the girl he'd met in Yellow Hill. Though she had traded the yellow sundress for a leather cavalry coat and black breeches strapped with a gun belt, there was still a softness about her that the world had not yet stolen. It was elusive, but there. Carson saw it, bore witness to it. Well, she asked. Carson nodded. Everything I know is yours to have, he said. And then he had turned away, unable to further match her gaze. Back on the Duke of Natchez, the wind rolled over the sunless sun deck. The steamer sounded a docking whistle, its big side wheel paddle chewing up the river toward the row upon row of Creole river houses and saloons lining the port of Baton Rouge. The port was overflowing with cotton stacks corseted in heavy hemp ropes. Passengers straddled barrels of wheat and barley. There were men and women smoking or tilting back bottles of whiskey trying to keep warm, bundled in heavy coats. Some hovered over shivering children, sheltering them from the cold wind and the cold-blooded cutthroats famous to lurk the river, all waiting for transport. Beyond them, rising tall among the pastel-painted homes and businesses, was a gloomy castle, the Louisiana State Capitol building. It overlooked Baton Rouge and its dark river, a gray cloud-mantled warden with fire-blackened windows. Hanging from its lofty crenels were flimsy scaffolds dangling on guy lines. Each scaffold bore a mason who worked to repair what the slavers' revolt had rightfully cost the rebel city. The steamer's massive wheels slowed, and over its thunderous, water-slapping chalk came the high cry of fiddles and drums echoing off the black Mississippi and the lily pads of ice bound for New Orleans. Carson smiled at the sounds of people pestering or persisting in their gaiety despite the pestilent winter. Their endurance in the face of all this new suffering reminded him that no matter the growing darkness, there was a light that would forever remain beyond its reach, or so he dared to believe. And that's where we'll stop.
Woo.
Let's fucking go.
Absolutely. Bravo.
Thanks.
Yeah, it really does have a lot of kind of that same feel as Zach's reading of that. We're winding up, like we're setting the stage. I was trying to think, since you've been playing the game, of kind of the tool that each author is wielding tonight, and I was trying to decide what exactly that tool is there, because we have that kind of high-flying kind of exposition where you're covering a lot of ground, and then zooming in, so to like the fingers packing pipes and
Sure.
Yeah,
Saber.
yeah, all very deftly done.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And
Seth's
if we
writing-
or go ahead,
Oh,
Zach.
sorry.
I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was saying, yeah, for me, Seth's writing is like a saber. It is well balanced. It cuts at the right places. You can use it to thrust home, and it is also incredibly elegant and delicate when it needs to be. That is, I've read this book. It is absolutely a splendid end to a splendid trilogy and a fantastic work of art on its own. So, Seth, be 100% proud of that, and it only gets better from there.
I appreciate that. Means a lot.
I'm gonna say nib of a fountain pen, right?
That's
So
good.
Seth does something that I think is so rare, and that is you build living worlds. And the way, first of all, Carson's relationship with Annie is so gorgeously painted in what is a very brief scene. And we got not only their dynamic, but we also get this profound sense of brokenness from Carson. And then you're giving us these incredible descriptions of the ship itself. And then we zoom out a little to what's happening, alongside of the water. And then we zoom out even further. And then you bring us right back in. And it's just incredibly done.
Thank you. That's very sweet. Love that. Appreciate that.
Yeah, and that's the thing about this series too, is that just the scope of it is so large that it is remarkable that when we hear those moments, that how much of it does take place in a very small kind of intimate scale, because there's big stuff happening, but it really is about characters interacting.
Absolutely. If you don't have characters, you really don't have anything, is what I believe.
Yeah,
It's true.
Well, great. Now I'll read the rest of the book. Everybody
All right, yes,
settle
please
in.
do.
We'll just
Grab a blanket.
No, because I like to, I think about writing, or I think about, when we were going to get together, what are some of the things that I always find valuable asking other authors? And one of the things, while I was reading through Rae's work, there's one of the things that I've always thought that was interesting that I've been waiting to ask her until now, so that she wouldn't have any sort of notion that she would have to be answering this question right at this present moment.
Great. Let's go.
Isn't this wonderful? Isn't this exciting?
Yeah, you could have given me a heads up, but you didn't. And that's great.
That is correct. That's what real friends do. They blindside people. No, so I think the question that I think it's so valuable to ask from an author who writes brokenness so well is, why is it important for characters through their relationship? Like, I should say, when we examine characters through their brokenness and their relationships with other people, for you, when you're working through that, how does that manifest itself? Like, do you see the brokenness of a character at the outset and know that you want to deal with that theme? Or does the character evolve, speak to you, show its brokenness, and then you realize this is something that the plot must bear?
It's a really interesting question. And I think I've approached it from a couple of different ways. I'll start by saying my background is in mental health professionally. So I'm extremely interested in all of the unique ways that people become broken and how that brokenness manifests itself in people. and I just find people and their stories endlessly fascinating. So I think I'll always write about broken people. I think there's been times, especially in my short fiction, that I'll hear something, whether it's something, a piece of prose from another author or like a song lyric.
Mm-hmm.
And initially it does not make sense to me. And it doesn't make sense to me in a way that I'm deeply compelled to explore it. And I'll often try to explore that through creating a character who might believe that thing that is foreign to me. And like the example coming to mind is there's this amazing song from, I think it's the Mountain Goats, called No Something. Anyway, the lyric is, and I hope you die. I hope we both die. And I heard that and I was like, wow, what would have to happen to a person, right? And what would lead them to cope in a way that they would very enthusiastically say something like, and I hope you die, and I hope we both die. And essentially all of the lyrics of the song are proclaiming emphatically that they hope all these terrible things happen, that they're remembered terribly, you know, all of this. And I hear something like that and I'm deeply intrigued by it. And I want to know the kind of person or character that would feel that way and why they would feel that way. And I want to hopefully create a character like that where the reader can still empathize, because I think empathy is it, right? That's the thing. Understanding people who are different from you. 100%.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think the answer to that question informs why your characters are so strong in your work, why there's always a great job that you're doing of painting a picture, right? But the characters inside of the portrait are the ones that lead the eye to continue on through the landscape. And I think I just marvel every time, especially when reading through some of your newer stuff that you've shared with me. I just think your character work is second to none for anyone working in the industry right now. I really do.
Yeah.
I had a question for Zach, if I can, Josh, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Please.
So, John, inside of your work, there's especially when I was reading Hunger's as Old as This Land, there's a persistence with your character Cyril, and we talked a little bit about this at your book launch, but I wanted to dive into it just a little bit more. There is a willingness for someone to cast off the favor that they truly owe someone, because Cyril owes someone his life.
Right.
And he casts it off for money. And, well, not just for money, but for just the prospect of more, right? That's this type of man, this mercenary kind of man. And I wanted to ask you about that. Like, what is it inside of your work that leads you to a character who says, even though I have owed, I'm happy to forget at the cost of a coin? Talk to me about where that comes from.
You know what? There is, when you really examine history, I think there's a lot of that. There's a lot of good people throughout history. There's a lot of people who do the right thing, but there's also for people who, for that right thing does not matter, that everything to them is a transaction, that anything is for sale. And unfortunately, I think that's very prevalent in a lot of grander history. And unfortunately, it was also very prevalent in the Old West in the time when I was writing. When I had a character like Cyril, I wanted a character who was not malevolent in the sense that he is evil for the sake of being evil. He is evil because he can be better, but he views everything for sale, including those morals. He's not evil in the sense that he feels wrongly. He's evil in the sense that he does not feel, in that, yes, he acknowledges that there is a debt, but he leverages that so he can profit more off it. Mm-hmm. And when I'm writing a character like that, it's very interesting to get into the head and that mindset of someone who just sees everything in terms, every human connection in terms of that transaction. And it's something that is very hard, I think, to understand for people with morals. But when I was examining history, you find there's so much by way of betrayals and bad people and people committing horrible actions who unfortunately get away with it too. So it was kind of this chance to kind of explore that sort of, I don't even want to use the word sociopath because it's such a medical term, and there's, a lot of sociopaths aren't even like this. Just this complete mercenary character who is able to view this world in almost a progressive viewpoint, in the sense that he decides it just doesn't matter. All he wants is, as you said, more, and he's willing to stop at nothing to get it.
Sure, that nihilistic disassociation, I think, is what we're circling, right?
Right. It's like, it's interesting because there's this one phrase that really stuck out to me. It's a very different kind of villain, but it was a writing on Vincent Price's character in what's it called? In Witchfinder General, that actually informed some of me with Cyril, where it was he is he's not just a sociopath or a nihilist. He believes very strongly in himself and in his own profit.
Mm-hmm.
And that was something that really stuck with me when I was designing Cyril's character.
Sure.
It's funny that both of those examples are, historical examples. It seems like you don't have to dig too far back. Like we're living in this moment, right, where everything is content and everything is, I could suggest, instead of sociopath, capitalist. That's the world that
Let's
we live
just
in.
get into everybody. Welcome to the Economist Hour with Josh. We're going to start talking about late stage capitalism and the horrors that it wreaks upon the world. Josh, go ahead.
Man, it's almost, you've been reading my mail.
And so has the government, Josh.
Glad you brought that up, Seth.
You're all on the list now.
They don't read our mail. They read our minds, Seth.
Sure, thank you. That's actually why there's tinfoil in this. That's why I'm always wearing it all the time. So I appreciate you answering that question, Zach. And I did have one for you, Josh. After I read The Woodcutters, I had a couple of things that were very drawn out's not the right word. There's a certain way to your prose that is very sharp. It's almost like Cormac McCarthy and James Fenimore Cooper decided to do like a little project together, because you do a trick that's very difficult to pull off, and that is immediately with the reader you land a bunch of names right at the outset, and you're like, here's the people you're going to need to care about. Get ready and gear up, because terrible things are about to happen to all these people. And so when I was reading The Woodcutters, I thought it was very interesting that at no point in the book do you lean into sort of long prosaic passages. It's sharp, it's clipped. And I'm wondering, from your influences, where does that come from for you? That notion of that, beveled razor's edge, why would I need a compound sentence when I can do this with a subject and a predicate and let you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, that's a good question in terms of influence. I think that King's Hill reads very differently than that. I think it really is kind of more of a question of subject matter. And that's kind of the way that I envision the entire book, is just just like that kind of barreling toward the terror. But also I think perhaps I was just a little more confident to do
Talk
so.
About that.
Yeah, I think King's Hill was my first book, and I do think that just a level of confidence to say, not to need to explain, not to be pretty when it doesn't need to be pretty, to really just lay it out. I think. So yeah, I do think it's both. It's a question of what does this story need, but also just just feeling more comfortable with the language.
Yeah, and I think that comes through in the book, and I don't mean this in any capacity as pejorative, but it is literally like each chapter is like the cleaver coming up, sliding the meat over, and fuck the whole time. It's driving the whole time. We're chopping off chickens' heads, and there's no way to gussy it up the whole time.
Yep.
And so I just thought that was really interesting. There is a certain, there's a certain conveyed confidence that's all throughout that book. And I think you're absolutely right that once a writer who's built up the tool set over, years of work and years of reading and practicing and getting it wrong, I literally have a novel that can never see the light of day because it would ruin me of how terrible it is, right? But once we build up that tool set, then when we have the confident hands to wield it, that's when all those tools, you're like, I know how to use this. I know how to use a compound sentence when I want to use it. I know how to use 3 ands in a row to slow things down. And I think I couldn't agree with you more that confidence is, in many ways, it's 85% of the whole thing. Just believing in yourself and being like, there are a lot of rules, right? Rae and I were talking about this today. There's a lot of rules that people want to talk about, right? Well, you can't do this and you can't do that. And it's never been done that way and it's not going to work. And don't start your first fucking chapter with somebody talking because nobody knows what they're doing, right? And that's all wrong because they don't care if you break the rules so long as you make them believe that you broke the rules for the right reason. You make them forget that the rules exist.
Right. Yeah. I'm working on a young adult novel right now that opens with like some sort of ridiculous 19th century, like rambling description of the setting. And I'm like, what am I doing? But kids are going to love it. But yeah, I do think, so yeah, I really do think that question of just subject matter really drives things too. This is kind of a lower concept. The Woodcutters is a fairly straightforward concept. So
sure, no, but I wouldn't use the word low. I certainly wouldn't like it. It's still very much like I mean, obviously you're not trying to build a giant fantasy world and like with a bunch of politics in it, but it drives like a knife is a simple tool, but it's been around for thousands of years, and there's a reason that we still have them and they still work, right? So yeah, absolutely.
I'm also not ashamed of low culture, so
Well, I'm not either. I'm just saying, like,
yeah. No, I keep finding myself kind of like with this kind of like pattern of like doing something that I don't really know what I'm doing, and it's really kind of breaking my brain to try and figure out how to make it work, and then the next thing is like, boom, like let's do the thing that I know exactly where I'm going and exactly how this is going to work. So yeah.
I think too, sticking with our tool metaphor, it's a right tool for the right job kind of thing, right? I think a lot of times the book or the project really informs the form that it takes a lot of the time.
That's also true.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah.
So Seth, I got a question for you, actually.
Yeah, I'm here for it.
One thing that I think was really struck out to me with when it came to Light Sublime was the character you were able to imbue even the, quote unquote monsters with, Sigurd, the king, not going to spoil anything for anyone, but there was a lot of very interesting characterization there. And that's even present from the very start. And that really contrast to some of the more human villains in a sense. And I was wondering how you kind of designed that, what you were getting with there, and, and how you were able to kind of make like even characters who would just be kind of like faceless monster hordes kind of so real in a sense and so three-dimensional.
Before you answer, Seth, I just need to add, because Zach forgot, they're fucking incredible. These villains. When I tell you I scream message Seth a million times about these villains while I was reading, because they're, oh God, I could go on forever anyway.
Well, I appreciate that. That's very sweet. And I appreciate both of you all three of you having read the book. Like, that means a great deal to me. Like, I mean that with full sincerity. I think one of the things that's important to remember is the greatest villain in the history of literature for me is Iago. Yes. And then of course, after Iago, you have so many that have come after and that are in many ways poor representation or poor facsimiles of him, right? The important thing to remember about every villain is not only do they believe that they are right, is that they believe they are the hero of their own story. And especially with Sigurd and the vampires, like These are creatures who have lived for hundreds of years. Their primacy for them is unchallenged. Like, there is only one singular philosophy for the vampire, and that is to make all other creatures subjugated, right, beneath them, because these are the cattle. They have no time for human loves. They have no time for human philosophies. They only have time for dominance. And so inside of that culture, a monoculture, a monarchy that has this Red King, there is a persistent thought that goes for hundreds of years. And the Red Kingdom is the representation of what happens when those thoughts go unchecked. Right? And with humans, with the Society of Prometheus, like, there were little disagreements between them. There were differing positions on what their belief system was about, which is why in the third book I bring a culmination into one particular character who's like their high scholar or whatever. And so that's why the Society of Prometheus is very much human. So there cannot be a uniformity among them, except in their general agreement that it would be great if humanity could just go back to worshiping the old gods. Like, wouldn't that just be marvelous if we could just be shot back into the primordial ooze where we all belong, right? But everything else among them they disagree on. For the vampires, we follow one king who follows the blood. The blood is the life, and that's and when you take those two positions and you sort of set them together, you can have this dichotomy of villainy where everyone can feel alive. And if your villains aren't alive, and if people don't love your villains, it's why in all three of these books, the first thing I do in every single one of the books is I introduce a villain first. And I will always say that if you're doing an adventure book, get your villain on the page immediately and make me both love and afraid of them at the same time. So that's one of the ways that I do it. I think it's a really good question.
Something you just said, I never realized this, but you have two primary antagonists in this book. The vampires, who you just said want domination over all else. And then you have the Society of the Prometheus, who essentially want to be subjugated above all else. And
right.
Was that intentional? That
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And all of it playing out like in a framework of post-Civil War
right.
United States. So, yeah.
Which in my books I call the Slavers' Revolt, because fuck all those Confederates.
Amen.
But that's me.
Here.
Yep. Fuck the Confederacy. I think we're all on the same page.
I just want us to all be on the same page. That's me.
Let's just all, like, there's a lot to disagree with in this world, but let's just all say Jefferson Davis should have hanged.
Right.
Perfect. Well, I'm just thinking, and I'm gonna shoot this back towards Rae, because like these questions about villains and about like, I don't know, I just think, especially with this group of writers, there's just, I don't know, a real kind of humanism that comes through, and I think a lot of people don't necessarily expect that from horror, because they're wrong. But I think that, you know, I do think that, you know, by the end of that Light Sublime, that there is a genuine kind of like humanistic move there, and that kind of that focus on empathy. And then I just wanted to kind of, because Rae, like in Merciless Waters, I was just thinking, like, who would you identify as the antagonist in that book? It's such a
yeah. They're all antagonists. Maybe that's a spoiler, but that was a deliberate choice when I set out to write this. Was I wanted to, and you know, it's funny. I read the reviews. I know you're not supposed to read the reviews. You can find them at hands. I love every moment of it. And some of them say, you know, things that suggest to me that they were expecting perhaps a traditional like romance or fantasy setup where there's a more clear protagonist, a more clear antagonist. And really going into this, I am obsessed with villains. And I wanted to write a book in which all of the characters were deeply flawed, and not deeply flawed in like a cute, like, oh, she's just too selfless and everyone walks all over her. Not like that, you know, like actually profoundly damaged, broken women in this case. And the two main characters who are in, a romantic entanglement is how I would describe it. Their brokenness fits together in such a way that it creates its own harmony. I'm not even sure that's great. But that was very much the story I wanted to tell. I don't think there is a protagonist. I think the only character perhaps that isn't very clearly in the wrong is Yinka, which is the snippet that I read for you. And even her, I mean, she's essentially suicidal. And I won't spoil the book by couching that in any way. But again, it goes back to my desire to just explore people's brokenness. And Yinka always makes me think of this thing I heard, and I can't remember where I heard it, but it was to do with people that struggle with thoughts about ending their own life. And that was that people don't jump out of windows unless the building is on fire. So with Yinka, I wanted to explore, why is the building on fire? And I try to do that, I think, with each of the characters. And hopefully, people feel empathy for them anyway, even though they're making at times pretty horrific choices. But that's what's interesting to me anyway, is how can we explore empathy for people that otherwise would be a villain in someone else's story.
Yeah, and to piggyback on that, I think, Rae, what you do so well, and I know that you were searching for the word, but I think your characters don't create a harmony, they create a dissonance. Like it's the two notes striking together, and they're the measure of them is going on for so long you're waiting for it to resolve. Like the ear aches to hear it resolve into an ending. And to your credit, you go, nope.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely not.
I love that you use that metaphor, because in the Stradivarius, one of the final lines includes the phrase, "It was as if his whole life was played in a minor key." And that's exactly hearing that minor note and waiting for the resolution, and God damn it, it just never comes.
Never comes. Yeah. That's great.
It is. It's a fantastic book.
It really is.
Thank you.
Just seeing if we had any questions in our comments over here.
Well, yeah, ask us questions, folks. In the chat.
Guys, this is like a full audience interactive here. Let's.
Wouldn't it be great if we had someone on the line? Like, hey, it's Charles in Cincinnati. Charles, you're on the line. Go ahead.
Call-in show.
Oh, wouldn't that just be the best to do an old-fashioned call-in show, like coast to coast?
That's an idea. So copyright that.
Yeah.
Don't give it away for free.
Wouldn't like the idea of like 4 horror writers or 4, just 4 speculative fiction writers doing a full-on like midnight hour, call-in, a great idea for a horror story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, they did that. That's what is it? It's the movie about the call-in host, and like his signal sound is what causes the zombie apocalypse.
Pontypool.
Pontypool.
There it is, Pontypool. We literally just made Pontypool right here. That's what we did.
But I think we need this. This clearly needs to be an online call-in therapy show.
Well, I actually have a question for Zach. I'm curious because I haven't read your pirate book yet, but since we both written what I imagine to be similar time periods, late 1700s, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but that was the heyday of our pirates. And stories set at sea. Like, I know the ocean setting means a lot to me, and I'm curious what it means for you in your book.
It's interesting because I was really, it really got me a chance to explore history I don't usually get to. It's kind of set during the golden age of piracy, which is, I think, is like the early-ish 1700s, so probably around like
1730
years before Merciless Waters. It was really able to kind of explore, because everyone knows I write Jewish stuff, shock and awe, but it was really a nice chance to explore how a traditionally oppressed people or characters can have more of this freedom with this relatively unexplored region of the world at that point for these anti-Semitic colonial powers, and also how characters who would be typically oppressed can find more strength and find more freedom, but also kind of the danger that they have of also almost becoming oppressors themselves towards more vulnerable people. And also it allowed me to kind of explore the ideas of appropriation without any spoilers. The villain, Sebastian Hawkins, it let me go with a very new route of him, where he's not someone who's hateful towards Jewish culture, that he wants to destroy it. He is someone who actually loves it because he views it as something old and powerful and almost magical, but without any true appreciation of it, because he views it throughout this very imperialist lens. So it was really a chance for me to explore some really new stuff that I really haven't been able to really give a chance to. And just obviously characters who are flawed or dangerous or even cowardly, and able to kind of put them in situations where they have to rediscover or keep their bravery, their humanity. And that's and it's really been a lot of fun exploring, and it's been a lot of fun doing that. Sorry, I was taking up way too much time with that answer.
No,
Not at
that's
all.
You're fine.
And would you say, is it like, what subgenre of horror would you call it?
I would definitely say there's a lot of folk horror there, with maybe like a touch of cosmic, because it's very much the idea of Jewish folklore when it's kind of but you try to translate the more rural settings to the open sea, and that can be very isolating at points. Honestly, I was kind of thinking this over. It might be like the first Jewish swords and sorcery novel. I don't think there was Gentlemen of the Road by Michael Chabon, but that is more of a historical. There's no real sorcery there.
Well, that's him doing Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser.
Yes,
right.
And it is honestly, it's a fantastic book too. But yeah, I'm probably wrong. I could be wrong, but there's not very much Jewish swords and sorcery there. So this might be like the first novel, and swords and sorcery is like so entwined in horror in like ways that I just absolutely love. So it was kind of like a real way to kind of like mash these genres together, throw in a bit of cosmic horror, throw in a bit like a lot of folk horror, throw in a bit of, ghost horror, and, basically pirate horror, which is, if it's not a thing, it totally should be.
Sure.
And that actually does lead me to a question for you, Rae. So we were talking about how, the kind of the blending of these relationships and how dark and, messed up it can be. How do you find it, Jack is a really great character. She's got so many layers. And there's so much we learn about her without any spoilers, that she doesn't necessarily evolve at points, but there are layers of her that get revealed to the reader.
Mm-hmm.
I find that like very, very skillful writing. How would you say you found that to do? Did you go in with kind of a picture of them, and then you kind of peel back those layers? Do you discover more as you write, or how did you kind of map out that like discovery?
Yeah. First, I definitely agree that Jack is stuck. They're all stuck. And I think that's a really important theme in the book, is being stuck. Again, I'm struggling to not give any spoilers. But I've written variations of these two characters as a couple in multiple short stories, and I'm halfway working on a longer work. Again, I'm really interested in the dynamic between a narcissistic partner and a somewhat obsessive or dependent paramour. And it's an example of brokenness that I think those personality types come together in a way that is dangerous and magnetic. And so, yeah, all that to say, I saw their dynamic very clearly in my head. And the opening is sort of intentionally disorienting. And I think that's been received in mixed ways, which is totally fair. But I did that intentionally because it's a disorienting world that we're going into in Merciless Waters. And everyone there is disoriented, and they have no memory, and nobody's really happy and nobody's really upset, and we're all just kind of stuck. And like, for me, the ocean was very much a symbol of that water as far as the eye can see. We're aimless, we're directionless, and I really wanted to do folk horror on the sea. I love folk horror. I love all things like cult and interesting religious sects. I think all that's so interesting, and taking that out on the ocean, like you mentioned a little, Zach, the isolation of folk horror. I think it's really interesting, the belief systems that develop when people are in isolation. And I'm curious, Josh, I haven't gotten a chance to pick up the Woodcutter, but when I hear woods, I automatically think folk horror. How would you classify your book?
I don't know. Is there a name for this? I was just thinking about it recently about how so much of my writing has focused around this just idea of like the bad place. Lovecraft does that a lot, right? Where there's just something off, or where the threat is kind of less objectively present and more just kind of King's Hill is named after a place, King's Hill, where things are wrong. I'm not sure where that comes from, but I just kind of keep returning to it. Just the idea of place itself as being kind of an antagonist.
It's almost like carnivorous geography. I think someone said that.
That's interesting.
That's something I actually really like about Josh's stuff. Like I said, I haven't finished The Woodcutter yet, but I have read King's Hill, and everything. One thing Josh excels at is a thing you need to make this sort of setting is that the setting itself feels like a character, and sometimes like everything feels alive in a scary sense, and you feel it's out to get you.
Sure. Yeah, it comes from this. It actually has a Latin root in the name of loci, L-O-C-I, and it's the notion that the memories or actions that have been impressed upon a place further affect it later on in the future, right? It's one of the places where we get the idea of the haunted manor, right? So many murders took place here. How could the ghosts not want revenge and to be heard and cry out? So yeah, I think I'd absolutely agree with you, Josh, that the notion of the bad place. And my favorite Lovecraft story that does that is The Haunter of the Dark, where the guy's trying to get to the old church on Bienville Street, right? And he keeps trying to get there, and everybody's like, no, man, you don't want to go there. Like, you don't want to go to this place. It's super bad. And then when he finally gets there, he sees the creature, and then it starts stalking him back toward his house. And it's a great subgenre, the bad place, the place. What is it? What is it? Robert E. Howard calls it the men, or the place that men were not meant to go, is how he refers to it in The Pigeons from Hell. So
yes.
Yeah, I love that.
That's such a good story.
It is one of the great horror stories of the 20th century.
100%.
I think of Hill House.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, duh. Duh. Of course. Absolutely. Now, will you jump into that? Like, what about Hill House then? Like, what jumps out to you about it? Like, what makes it special over all these? Because how many fucking stories have we seen, either movies, whatever? It was like, this is a super spooky place. Like, what about Hill House jumps out to you?
The thing that gets me, that always gets me.
I was asking, right? But I want to hear what you have to say, though.
Sorry,
go ahead.
Like I said, Zach, my bad.
No,
reclaiming my time. We're on the side. I think we talked about setting as a character, and I think Shirley Jackson does just an unmatched job in that opening of Hill House of doing that very thing. That sense that some houses are just born bad, right? And whatever walked alone. Hill House, not sane, right? Stood against the whatever. It's just so impactful, and immediately this bitch is not fucking around. And by this bitch, I mean the house, right? It's just incredible. The idea that a place could desire you, and my wonderful friend Sapphire Lazuli did such a good job in her video essay talking about this very thing, that it could want you, This architecture could want you, like in its bones, desire you maliciously. That concept is so unnerving, and that it could mess with your mind in such a way. I won't spoil the end of Hill House, even though you've had like 50 years, 70 years to read it.
Right.
But yeah, no, Zach, what were you going to say?
The floor recognizes the Congressman Zachary Rosenberg from Florida.
Honestly, I really want to co-sign what Rae said about that, but also add part of what makes, I think, a dark location story work is how the characters play off with the location, where Hill House is in such a way that it plays to the fears and the terrors of the characters inside it. Eleanor, in a sense, there's that ambiguity, but you also kind of get the sense this house is feeding on Eleanor in a sense, that it is that the horror of the house is playing off the characters in it. And I think for as the genius loci situation that Seth brings up, when you have these horrible locations, there's kind of like two character dynamics: the character of the location and the people who made it what it was, and the character of the interlopers. Because I think a lot of times if you have characters who have just no connection or no flaws, who are just there to get terrorized and killed, it's going to make for largely a very boring story. But when you have characters with those flaws and those terrors and those secret hidden chambers and emotions in their hearts that this place can exploit, that these emotions get opened, and it really lends itself to some really effective horror in that sense. And I really think The Haunting is one of the best adaptations I have seen, and Shirley Jackson just absolutely nails it throughout the whole thing. Everything from the people John Montague recruits, and how often now do we see the character of like a supernatural investigator bringing people into the haunted house for whatever reason. And I really think that all owes a debt to Hill House. And I'm not really sure anyone else has done it better. And just the language in there, like the idea of whatever walked there walked alone. It's just so powerful.
I think again, what makes that work, let's come back to it again, is Eleanor, right? Like there's, that character who is so painfully interior, who who feels and experiences everything, and so yeah, I can't imagine Hill House without it being filtered through that very particular kind of point of view, which is what it's really about. I think about how actually so many of the things that Jackson does in that book to telegraph the house's badness are really kind of telegraphed. They're really kind of like just almost clunky, just kind of like, boy, I really felt sick when I drove up the drive. Boy, isn't it weird in here? But it works, and it's because it's like because while characters are making these little kind of cracks, Eleanor is kind of soaking it all up and processing it for us, and so it's beautiful. It's a beautiful book.
Yeah.
I think for those who love Hill House by Shirley Jackson, they should absolutely, if they have not, pick up Richard Matheson's Hell House, which does what you're talking about, Zach, where the investigators go into the house, and Matheson does. There's some problematic elements with women's sexuality in that, because apparently he thinks women are just, I don't know, smooth-brained and easily controlled.
Yeah,
which I don't agree with, despite what people may tell you about me. No, but I think you should definitely pick up Richard Matheson's Hell House. And despite the poor, characterization of women in it, it does a lot of tricks that even Shirley Jackson, which she doesn't attempt in her book because she's trying to do something else, but it's a lot of fun what Matheson does. And obviously he's a huge influence on the genre as well.
Yeah. Emmerich Belasco, the Roaring Giant. That's such a fun one.
Great. Yeah.
Well, Seth, I don't know if the others picked up on this, nor anyone watching this, so I'll be more explicit about it. But the carnivorous geography is something that we've talked about and is a major theme in your work. Would you mind talking a little bit about what draws you to that idea?
Sure. I've always wanted. I wanted to do. How much of this do I say? So, what Ray's specifically referring to is my Blackwell series. The first book, All These Subtle Deceits, starts to introduce these elements of something called a carnivorous geography, which is this entity that feeds on the negative emotions and psychic essence and pain and suffering of other people, and it grows in its expanse. It's what is the right way to put it? It's like a tiger in the tall grass, and it's as it feeds on more and more people, it does not grow larger, but its hunting range does, right? And so its influence expands. And a carnivorous geography represents a place that not only wants you to suffer while it's there, but it wants to wrap itself around you inside of terror and disenfranchisement, and it wants to feed on you like a supernatural black hole that's eating everything around it, and that the only way that we can sort of combat these things is by coming together as communities and reshaping the communities that we're in. And so, yeah, carnivorous geography is a thing. It actually hasn't been mentioned in the books thus far, so Rae has provided, in fact, a spoiler to the book series, which is fine. She's not ashamed about it. But anyway, y'all be able to read more about it in the third book in the series, which hopefully comes out this year, which is called All That Mankind Fails to Bear.
Looking forward.
Which Rae has read, and I'm very appreciative.
How have I not read it yet, Seth?
Let's go to the phones.
That's messing money.
It's great. I know.
So yeah, that's about the only other thing that I was thinking about is just in, and I mean, Rae, you brought it up a little bit talking about oceans and things like that, but just thinking about the role that place plays. I know certainly Seth, the places in that Light Sublime places, every chapter opens by kind of informing us, and we have this little kind of constellation of very important kind of locations, and I was just wondering, like, for everyone really, like, just how much that informs where the story is going. I guess it's a different form of the question that was posed earlier about character and trauma, but rather like how much does your place inform the types of stories that you tell? We should really ask that because it's in Florida, and we're looking for those Florida stories, the Florida man stories.
I'm Florida man now.
I did not say that.
When it comes to, so let me just disassemble this. Sorry, my audio cut out for a second. That was that was trauma with the story in the.
No, I was just. It wasn't a very well phrased question. I apologize to everyone.
No.
But just trying to think about how just basically about how place informs your storytelling, and.
It's interesting. I'm not really sure I've written much by way of Florida stories, but there is a lot in Florida that has me think about, oppression and hatred and violence. I work in child welfare in Florida, and that can be very, very, very harrowing at times and very difficult, and sometimes, emotionally draining. And there's a lot we see in Florida, not to get too political, that is also emotionally draining and oppressive and terrible. And there's a lot about Florida I love. There's a lot of beautiful places. There's a lot of great people. There's a lot of wonderful communities. And I really guess I try to take some of that into my writing as well. Just remember, the good and the bad. I can't say there's a very high Jewish population that I'm very close to down here too, which is very, very helpful when it comes to writing Jewish characters and Jewish communities. And also, sometimes you're driving to work and for a few days you see up a sign that says things like Kanye was right, which actually happens. And that also kind of leads to like you wondering, am I safe here as a, minority Jewish person? Am I, how long am I, and that kind of leads to some thoughts with writing. I can't say Florida affects it, very much, but I would say there's certainly some aspects there.
Anybody else want to swing?
Yeah. So, it's very important to me that I'm a Texas writer. I think Texas has a beautiful tradition of writers who have changed the literary landscape multiple times over. Cormac McCarthy, Joe Lansdale, who is without question the Mark Twain of our time. And in many ways, the way that he writes East Texas makes him the William Faulkner of Texas, with his wonderful simplicity, like a drunken uncle sitting on the porch telling you a story. And that's not to remove people like Larry McMurtry, who understood Texas at a marrow deep level. And so for me, I got asked one time, I was at Armadillo Con, and we were doing a Texas panel, like what is it like to be, why do you identify as a Texas writer? Why is Texas important to you? And it's really interesting because when I was a kid, I grew up in this place called Monahans, Texas, and it's this piece of shit town. It's like 5,000 people. It's an oil boom town where my dad worked in an oil field. And the only thing that it has to any sort of semblance of fame is that it's got the Monahans Sand Dunes State Park, which is literally just like 500 acres of sand that blew in 1 million years ago, right? And I remember being a kid and very much, and this will sound funny, but it is in no way comedic, I felt like Luke Skywalker looking over the hill on Tatooine at the binary sunset, being like, how the fuck do I get out of here? Right? And it's a very hard place. And it exists as a place that for hundreds of years, only hard people have come to live there, doing hard labor in hard times. And my dad was one of those people. And so it's very interesting that when they asked me, they're like, what is it like being a Texas writer? And I spent so much of my life wanting to get out of Texas, wanting to be anywhere else, wanting to be done with Texas. But as I grew older and as I began to see the rude beauty of its landscape and begin to understand the great wealth of empathy that exists inside of many people who live here, though certainly not all of us, but it was very clear that even though I wanted to be done with Texas, Texas will never be done with me. And it's why, in That Light Sublime, the first book entirely takes place in Texas. And that is done specifically so that people can see like the beauty of the landscape is contrasted by what is effectively a great horror that resides within this place and in its people. And so location is very important. Now, it's important that in the second book, I get right the fuck out of Texas as quick as possible and expand the story, because I wanted it to be also not a Texas story, but an American story about the American character and the people living in it at the time. And so location for me is very much, it is a part of who I am, and therefore it must be a part of the stories that I am telling, right? That's what location means to me. That's which is a long way of saying it's important.
Yeah, I think a lot about the way that the hometown lives. I'm 2,000 miles away from the place that I grew up, and but yeah, exactly like you said, it can't get away from it. So, yeah,
Ray, what is location? Or go on. I'm sorry, Josh.
I was just gonna say a lot of stories start there. So yeah,
sure. Ray, go ahead.
Oh, I also unfortunately live in Florida. I don't think I've ever thought about this until this moment. For me, the place has impacted me just as much as my experience of the people in it, which is to say, I've been deeply impacted by moving through the world and not always feeling safe there. And I think that that's a theme that you can find in my work, a thread that you can find there, as people that are often unsafe and feel very unsafe. That the structures and other people in their lives that perhaps are in positions to protect and or support them do not do that a lot in my stories. I think I've felt that a lot lately around here in Florida, that perhaps, not to get political, but the government, right, maybe doesn't have our best interests in mind. I don't know, novel concept. But I think that's another thread that you might find in my writing, is that traditional power structures, police, right, and any police characters, they're often bumbling or ineffective in my work. Male characters that are perhaps in a position to protect don't, for one reason or another. So maybe that's the impact right there, but I'm just putting that together on the spot. So maybe I'm making it all up. I don't know.
Hey, I just said the super fucking brilliant answer, but it's like whatever, like I'm shooting from the hip here.
Seth, you're in Texas, we're in Florida. We're like, we're trying.
See, that's the great thing about Texas, is we don't try at all. That's really where it's at.
I'll be visiting Texas for the first time next year, actually.
Well, I hope you get out as quickly as possible. No, I'm kidding. Where are you going? Where are you going to be?
I'm going to be at Ghoulish Books. Ghoulish Books, which
San Antonio
I think is near the Austin. Yes,
San Antonio.
Thank you. God, my geography. So yes, I will be in San Antonio.
I hope you say San Antonio just like that to all the people in San Antonio. That would be great. They'll be like, "You must be from Florida?" Yeah. It'd be great. You'll love it. San Antonio is like a big gray spot on the map. You're going to love it. Go visit the Alamo.
I don't think the tourism board is going to hire you anytime soon, so.
No, they shouldn't. They absolutely shouldn't.
All right. Well, what I've learned is that Florida is mostly an idea.
Florida is a feeling.
Gotcha.
Florida is a trauma.
It's a stain. It's a scent that you can't be rid of,
What is it Steinbeck says? A poem, a quality of light, a stink, a dream, right? That's what he says about sleep.
Part, yes.
100%.
Yeah.
All right. I feel like maybe we're winding down here.
That's our time.
Yeah.
I think that's our time.
Well, I want to thank everybody so much for joining us, and thank the folks at FanFiAddict and Adrian, who helped set this up and hosting us here, and everybody who tuned in, and we see you in the comments. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate this. This is great.
Let's do it again soon.
Yeah,
let's do it again. I agree.
And buy our books.
Buy our books, absolutely. Without question. Right,
and thank you, Cassandra. You've been amazing in the chat. You get the VIP chat award, hands down.
And go check out Cassandra. And go check out Cassandra's work. She's got a great story in Escalators from Hell.
Awesome.
Marvelous.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.